regardless of what I say about the current Aston Martin lineup, I do, as a whole, quite like the brand. Not every car they've made has been a hit, but there's enough of them out there that I could very happily be an Aston Martin owner one day. But until now, I've actually never driven a DB9, which is a bit of an oddity really. I think for most people that would be the Aston Martin that they perhaps aspire to own. After all, it was the car so cool that it got its very own fridge back in the days of Top Gear's Cool Wall. The early DB9s, like this one, haven't really aged that well to my eye. They're still a good looking car, but not quite as great as either the Vantage or the later DB9, which is essentially the Virage. Those still look pin sharp and are magnificent things all round. To the untrained eye, this looks very much like a sort of V8 Vantage type thing, but it's a bit longer, it's got basically the same interior, and is presented here in a rather unusual colour combo. It's a Ferrari colour on the outside, Grigio Titanium. It's got this blue leather on the inside, and it seems that Aston, a bit like Porsche, when you specify blue, they do give you a lot of it. It's also got this sort of walnut waterfall dash thing here, and the first generation centre console, which is all now looking a little bit out of date. If you sat this car next to a V8 Vantage of the time, I would think of no conceivable reason whatsoever to want one. Now this one is a drop top, and usually I'm kind of anti-Aston Martin convertibles. They just don't look as good, and for me, the looks of an Aston Martin are of critical importance. So the DB9 for me is largely a write-off. I just couldn't think of any reason why you might want one over a Vantage. That is, until the moment that you sit in one. Because the moment you park yourself in this car, you know you're in for a decidedly different experience to that offered by the Vantage. This car has an automatic gearbox, and unlike that in the Vantage, it's a traditional torque converter box, which means that for driving along smoothly, it is far, far better. If you're the sort of person that insists on having a manual, you are probably the sort of person that would much prefer to have the Vantage. They did do a manual in the DB9, but they are relatively rare. What this car does have as standard is that magnificent, glorious V12. Now there's something about big, high cylinder count, large swept capacity engines of old. There really, truly is. This car officially puts out about 450 brake, and I've just come from a Lotus which puts out apparently about 410 and is considerably lighter. So this should really feel, well, a little bit down on power. But it doesn't. Not at all. This thing is brilliant. Is wonderful, and despite this car's kind of grand touring pretensions, to hustle it down a road like this, it's actually way better than I thought it might be. Just that first couple of bends, it's doing things to me. It really is. The body feels actually pleasingly rigid, thanks in part to that sort of Lotus-derived chassis that all Astons of the time period used. I am in fact currently being chased by a very nice Lotus Esprit too. You may be able to see that on one of the rear cameras. That's one of the many cars they look after at Stratton Motor Company. It is a wonderful dealership just to spend a little bit of time in. The new sales guy there, Mark, is fantastic. He's come from a background of working in high performance and luxury cars. He was a Bentley man for many, many years, and he's taken to Astons like a duck to water. He's really thrown himself into it, and I can see why. I mean, to be fair, at Stratton, he is rather spoiled. The service manager, Tim, is currently behind me in the Esprit, making sure that that car is obviously fit and ready to go. And wow, that's an Austin truck. Bit of an old school day. The sat-nav screen has popped itself up here, and it is embarrassingly old. It's hideously out of date. But you know what? That's not really a big issue. It's not a deal breaker. The leather in here is just it's proper stuff, and there's so much of it. You really do sit in this and think, yeah, this is why people buy an Aston Martin. To the best of my knowledge, this car is basically standard, and that exhaust is just so well judged. Aston Martin V12s sound totally different to any others out there. This particular car is on very low miles. It's less than 19,000 of them, in fact. And so I'm extremely grateful to Mark for sending me out in it. He basically heard that I'd never driven a DB9 and insisted that I take it out. I, of course, am far too polite to resist such an offer. If you want to criticise this car, it is of course easy to do. Now, to be fair, most of my issues with this particular car are ones of specification. Not big on the blue interior, the blue roof, or the exterior colour. But of course there will be plenty of cars out there in slightly tastier combinations. Less forgivable is stuff like the sort of really old, hideous Ford Key, which is just bad. And some of the switches in here are a little bit cheap. But this is miles ahead of the first generation Vanquish, which felt like an old Jaguar XK inside. If you've ever been in one of those, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's definitely firmer than I expected it to be, but it's far from uncomfortable. There you go. I deliberately went through a sort of fairly big rut in the road there, and no issues whatsoever. You know, it's kind of worrying driving this car because I'm really starting to like it. And there's an awful lot of cars out there that I really want. There's plenty that I don't want and have no interest in, but there's a lot that I do want. And at this stage, I really don't need the added frustration of having another car that I quite fancy. Maybe it's convenient that I'm more of a Vantage than a DB9 person. The later DB9 I think would definitely sway me, but this one is, even over a railway crossing, really well damped. And I've just been out in a Lotus. That is one of the best cars you'll ever find in terms of suspension. Oh, when you ask it to, it rips. Gearbox responds as well as I would expect an old automatic to. And it's geared quite long. Oh, throttle response is beautiful. Oh, yes! Wow! What a thing! Oh! No, it's not the quickest car in the world. It's geared a bit on the long side, and it is still fairly heavy. I mean, being a Volante, it's going to be even heavier than the Coupe, but it's got enough go in it to make you happy. This car hasn't been officially prepped or anything yet, so I was very lucky to be able to drive it. And you can see just how well it's been kept, because this is the condition it was in before it's gone to their valeting guys. And the valet guys at Stratton are some of the best. Their guy there, he's a magician. So if a DB9 is currently beginning to appeal to you as it is to me, I've got even more good news for you. I was chatting to Tim, who was in said Esprit, about the servicing cost, because I thought that's where the fun really would stop with one of these. Turns out that in day-to-day running, these aren't really that much more than a V8 Vantage. Yes, of course, it's going to drink a bit more. What do you expect? It's a V12. But in terms of servicing, your annual service on one of these is just about 100 quid more than it is in a V8 Vantage. Generally speaking, these are pretty bulletproof engines. The major piece of advice that everyone seems to give out is to keep an eye on the oil, because by the time the oil light comes on, it can be too late. So just keep an eye on that, keep it topped up regularly, and these will go on for a very, very long time. On the whole, it does actually feel like a pretty solid product too. The automatic gearbox actually isn't quite the killjoy that I thought it might be. It responds as quickly as I would expect an old torque converter to. Of course, with that massively torquey V12, if you let it row its own gears, it's still going to do a very fine job indeed. And you can make wonderful progress just letting the car do its own thing. The big service item apparently on these is spark plugs and coil packs. Spark plugs it is recommended to do about every 7 years, and the coil packs possibly may be worth doing at the same time. That is not cheap by sheer virtue of there being 12 of them, and the labour on these I think is quite difficult. Budget in all about £2,000 if that work hasn't been done. Putting the car into sports mode does make the gearbox respond actually quite a bit quicker. Much quicker, in fact. I'm surprised. This is an old gearbox. This is a gearbox that everybody complained about. Maybe it's because I've spent so long listening to people telling me how bad it is, I thought it was going to be utterly woeful. It's not the best ever, of course it's not. It's not a dual clutch box, nothing of the sort. It's not even an 8-speed ZF, which is what they use now, but for this kind of car, this gearbox suits it absolutely perfectly. Oh, just... It's not even a nice day today, but I'm just having so much fun in this thing. I did not expect this at all. I even remember Evo really heavily criticising this car when it came out. And I've given the DB9 a fair bit of stick myself. I take it all back. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Dear Father Christmas, this year I'd quite like a DB9. Thank you. Tell you the big surprise of this is steering. It's genuinely fantastic. And I've just got out of a Lotus. I've just got out of a Lotus Evora GT410, one of the best steering, best handling cars on the planet. Best there has ever been. And this is still amazing. It's got this ridiculous amount of texture coming through the wheel. It's light, it's delicate, but you can still tell what's going on. It's absolutely brilliant. I think that's quite enough from me. Thank you very much for joining me on this lovely journey. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. See you for the next one. Bye-bye.